Bonded Forever because about 14 years ago, we went through a significant exercise in scenario planning and ultimately downsizing our organization. At that time, it was United Family Services. So I want to start by sharing just one little tool that you can use to really help you hone in on what must be preserved as you go through this exercise. And it's called the hedgehog concept from Jim Collins' Good to Great for the Social Sectors. And the hedgehog concept asks you to look at three things and really focus in on the intersection of those three things. What are you most passionate about? What are you best at in the whole world that only you and your organization can do? And what is your economic driver? Because when you've identified those three things, you've identified the core of what must be preserved as you go through whatever exercise of scenario planning you're going to go through. So for us, United Family Services 14 years ago operated across a 4-county footprint. And we were the agency that you went to when you had a good idea to say, can you please go do this? All right, so we had gotten very umbrella big. We did consumer credit counseling, we did an employee assistance program, we did mental health counseling for what we called the Worried Well. We did a child abuse program in Union County. We did sexual assault program across all three counties. Consumer credit counseling was up in Iredell County. That was the only thing we did up there. And then we did victim services, primarily in Mecklenburg County for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And here's the kicker, we were unsustainable, right? We were consistently spending out of our deficit and had gotten to the point where the board said, I need a solution, right? So we went through all of the data points that Peter mentioned, right? And looked at where our economic drivers were, looked at what only we could do best in the world, and ultimately decided that as we looked through all of that, what we were best in the world at was victim services in Mecklenburg County. And so we went through the process then of ethically shutting down everything else that we did, right? We moved our consumer credit counseling to another agency. We moved our child advocacy center in Union County to another agency. We turned our employee assistance program over to a for-profit provider, just kind of gave them the entire book of accounts. And then the hardest thing we had to do was stand up in front of a group of about 50 employees and tell them they were losing their jobs, right? It was tearful. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, and it was absolutely the right thing to do because it helped the agency become solvent for decades to come. And if you think of all the people they've been able to help since then, you have to go through the hard stuff to preserve the core of what's good, right? So that's just my simple story for you. Sorry, I hit the necklace anyway. That's my story for you. Laura's going to share some lessons learned, and then we are happy to take questions along with Peter about anything you want to learn about.
Thank you, Catherine. I do think the truest statement Catherine made is that the process you go through is very difficult. You will be long-lasting friends and partners who have survived such a difficult ordeal. And you will, if you do this right, make your organization stronger, your community stronger, because you have focused on and been transparent of what you can not only do well, but what you can financially do well. And I think one of the things is you're making this process, and I think really loved what Peter was talking about in the sense of make sure you've got the data, and the data is critical, but the data's not everything, right? This is people. It's people's lives not only that work with us every day, but it's the people we serve in all these areas. And that's why it's very difficult to do this evaluation. And I think that's really what's important. And one of the things we did is we started the evaluation using those data and those checkpoints, and then looking at that data, we were able to say not just what the operations were, and we brought that very senior team and we got together and we talked very detailed, not just whose pet project or what we enjoyed, but looking at this and saying, what is our vision, who are we, and how do we most impact the community? And I think that's a really critical thing for each of us, because each of us in our times see how organizations evolve. And United Family Services, which is now Safe Alliance, is over 120 years old. You think about, you're gonna evolve, right? You're gonna have done a lot of things, and all of us have. But I think as you get the leadership together and you really have those tough conversations using the data points, then very quickly bring in more leaders and more direct staff who do the work. Because I think one thing I thought we did well, was we did ask the people who did the work, what happens if we can't fund this fully? What happens if you now work just in Union County? What does that look like? Because that gives you the input that sometimes you don't sit and understand when you sit in the C-suite. And then I think the next is, you can evaluate and you can do things too quickly, as we know, and you can take way too long to do them. And execute once you know, because it's like guest and fish. It doesn't get better with time. If the problem is there, it's gonna stay there. And I think that's one of those things, really knowing what are the triggers, being clear on them, and then executing. The thing then when you get to execution is having your board with you. I think that's one thing, is have communicated. And I think one of the things, how many of you serve on a board? Okay. Those meetings, they're an hour and a half, and people cannot really sit there and explain every risk, everything that could happen. So it does take a board that is willing to trust its leadership, but also willing to do the work before those meetings and understand. And so as us, as nonprofits, it's important we give them the information, but we also are willing to make those critical decisions that say, time is now, and really execute, because that transparency and that commitment is then what you take to the most important group, and that's your staff and the people who work with you. Because Catherine and I think of the people, when we tried to sit down and 50 people to say, which was almost half our organization, that we were not going to, the future was not going to be what it had been. As hard as it was, doing that respectfully before the whole community was already saying it to them, I think really brought, people are gonna be scared, they're gonna be angry, and they have every right to be. And to understand that. But we have to understand that emotion, as the leaders, we've already been working through that, right? We've already had those nights, the sleepless nights. We've already had that. So I think that integrity you bring to that conversation, tell people what you know, tell people what you don't know, and tell them how you're gonna work to figure out what those answers you can't answer. I think we worked hard on that, and it's, be completely honest, there's things we did really well, and there's certain things, Catherine and I occasionally look at each other, and they were talking about, Pete was talking about grants that you get, and they have requirements in them that you may not expect. I think we counted over 1,000 different toys, coloring books, crayons, because we had to return it to a grantor. And I'll tell you, we really didn't expect that in the middle of closing down 4 counties, but there are a lot of those kind of things that are going to take place. The sooner you do that, and then the next critical piece is to then go to the people who are your partners in the community and also your funders. And that has to happen. And I think being very clear of those talking points, how you're going to approach it, understanding with the clear vision, and then talking to them. And we had funders who really understood and were partners, and we had funders who were very disappointed and frustrated. And it doesn't mean those frustrated funders didn't come back to us. It's okay for people to be frustrated. You can anticipate it and disappointed. I think what you can do is, you can't change the reality of the message. You can't change that economically you're not in a position to continue to do all that work. all you can do is say that we believe this work is very valuable, and we're going to work to try to find people who do have the capacity or the alignment to do that work.
Thank you, Laura. The only other thing that I would add is to kind of echo Peter's comments about pick your cutoff time and then really do turn around, because closing the program doesn't automatically end the expense. You've got to leave yourself enough revenue to get through the transition period. So we had leases we had to pay off, offices we needed to close. It just takes time to take the off-ramp, right? So leave yourself enough time, leave yourself enough cash that you can actually get everything done that you need to get done ethically and still come out whole on the other end. So I think with that, questions? Sure. All right, your turn.
Thank you for sharing that story. My name is Larissa Magnon Mervin with Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy. My question is, Peter and also you guys have shared about being transparent with leadership team, funders, and I understand all of that. At what point are you transparent with your staff? Like if you're thinking of this exercise, you obviously share with your leadership team and your funders first, but eventually your staff needs to know, and how do you navigate that, and how much are you sharing at what point?
So I would say once we knew what the plan was and we're ready to execute it, the first stop has to be the staff, right? They can't hear it from someone else. And the minute you go start talking to a funder, it could go sideways and back to them. So for us, it was the transparency of, we know this is where we're headed, so you need to know first. But then you have to be prepared to navigate when everybody leaves you and starts looking for another job, right? So we did have some who left quite quickly. We had others who stuck with us till the end. And I think they stuck with us in part because of the way we handled the transparency with which we told them. Like Laura said, we had some who were very, very angry, and that's understandable. And then to my continuing surprise, and I still have the note to this day, I had several who left me notes on the very last day, thanking us for the way we'd handled the transition and saying that it had been, like just really the most profound thank you for being the leaders that we were. And that touches me deeply because we had such an impact on their lives in an arguably not great way at the end. So I think once you know, you've got to say.
And I think all of us are probably doing this because, one of the things about what's going on right now is you turn on your TV every night and they're talking about the new tax bill. I don't know what abbreviation to use. So everyone is seeing, this is not, I think the bad news is everybody is seeing it and talking about it. The good news is everybody is seeing it and talking about it. My staff meetings that we stop and have time and talk about, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here are the pieces in that don't know, and I mean, when, in a human services agency and who we serve and how we serve them is being impacted by presidential orders. And because of that, I think one of the things we try to do is have that as a part of every agenda with staff. And we can say, I think I always love when I go to prepare my slides for the next time, and they completely different because whatever's happened in that time is something I couldn't have envisioned or planned for. And the last time, I think I showed it last time and said, well, see, we thought where we were going, but look where we ended up. And I think that there's some value in that. One, none of us control what it's gonna be. We talked about the tax bill, and overnight that was in the House, it was a certain number, and then the Senate decided and it changed completely. I mean, I think that for our staff, part of that is saying what I can control and what I cannot control, but how I will respond to it. And I think that the experience left me that I probably don't make people feel as comfortable because I think people want their leader to say, we've got this. The ship will not go down. And the answer is, I think we've built we've got life rafts, we've put extra life preservers on, we're out trying to get other people to come and support us, but no one really controls where we are today. And as negative as that sounds, I also think it's a great opportunity. I think one of these pieces is, I feel like Safe Alliance is so much stronger for the difficult path, because we now, I think, have integrity to our mission, and we ask ourselves that frequently. If we hadn't gone through that process, I think that would have been harder. So I think there's some positive to these times.
I would just reinforce one thing that you said, which was the emotional processing. Don't discount the fact that as a leader, you've had time to emotionally process all of this. And so when it comes time when you are able to communicate to your staff at the first possible moment, I believe you should. Not on conjecture, or this might happen or that might happen, but hey, this is our path forward, and to control the message, right? You know, when you release it to a donor or a board member, you better believe that it's gonna somehow get back to a staff member who's gonna say, well, shouldn't we have heard this before? So controlling that messaging when you have it, but recognize that there's an emotional component to it, that you're not in the same place as the folks hearing it for the first time.
There's not a question. I will jump on one thing that I think if we could have done a little better, and I think that I have really seen people do well, is as soon as your executive team sits down and starts thinking about it, keep a running list of everyone in certain categories, community partners that'll be impacted, because you'll have a discussion, and later when you're trying to prepare those, donors who may be impacted, who are potential people who might be able to do this work, so keep those lists, because they are gonna be your communication list, and you know what happens, you're gonna be pretty tired, and you're gonna be mentally exhausted by the time you get through this and with your board, and you are going to leave someone out, so go in the entire time trying to think of who is my communication plan, and then not only who is it, but who goes into which kind of categories of who need to know day 1, hour 5, and what is the categories, and really be clear in that. I think maybe it's because I like control and to feel like I'm in control, but it sure helps when you know you're walking out and you say, these are the 6 talking points everyone walking into a room, from my board to senior leadership to donors who are supporting me, are using these same talking points.
Thank you. Oh, loud. Hi, Kaylin Haldeman with Next Stage. You've shared great insight about speaking to boards, staff, donors, community partners. I'd love to hear about your experiences communicating about programmatic changes or transfers to clients or communities served. Thank you.
So when we did communicate those out to clients, we always made an attempt to ensure that they had 2 or 3 alternatives, right? So we made an intentional effort to not just say, we're going away, but here's where you can get continued support, and then give them choice over where they would transition to. So that was an important part of it. It was the biggest piece that we needed to give people choice over was for the mental health counseling, that we just couldn't find a home for it, right? And so it was very important to us that they get advance notice as individuals. When was their therapist going to be leaving? who could be an alternative that they could go continue to seek treatment with. Everyone else, we were pretty much able to find a home for. So if they chose to, they could continue on with the same people they were seeing. They would just do so through a different agency.
Catherine said something earlier that I think is a really important point, and that was build in enough timeline to make those transitions where you're going to be proud a year from now how the client was treated. Because mental health counseling, to say to someone who is in a mental health crisis, so next week, we're going to, because it's cleaner, right? As the employer, we'd like to say to everyone, okay, we're closing this down. We're not going to live with all these sad, unhappy people looking at me every day, and we're going to do this. A year from now, you're going to be proud of yourself and proud of your organization when you say, we're going to figure out this over a 3-month time period to give you that opportunity, to give the stability to have that work through. It was part of the most difficult and constantly changing by trying to keep that in place. But I think it's something I think we would always say we felt proudest about fighting that battle to make sure. And I'm sure that there are people who think we should have done it for another year. You have to make up, but you have to figure out who is the value of your organization? What are your values? What is your morals?
Hi, my name is Melinda from the Sojourner Truth Place. First, I just want to thank you all for sharing. I feel like a lot of times we come into spaces where there are people and they are unwilling to share the hard stories, right? And we kind of feel like, wow, I'm falling behind, or I don't have that yet, right? But you guys have been willing to share some really vulnerable stuff, and I appreciate that. I guess my biggest question for y'all is, how did you receive care, right? Or what would you have wanted to receive in those hard moments?
Like the self-care piece?
Yeah, like when I
Did I not
struggle,
mention
I
trauma
wonder-
bonded?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think,
What do we do when we're in those hard spaces to get the care that we need?
I think for us, the leadership team that went through that together remains very, very tight. We went through it together, and we really relied on each other. I have so many stories, y'all. But there was one particular time when I went out to tell the funder for whom we counted the 1,200 coloring books and crayons, that we were going to have to discontinue the program and to propose how we thought it could transition. They were very, very angry and fairly brutal with me in particular. And I kind of limped out of that particular meeting and came back to the office. And I remember this vividly. Laura's like, you will not be going up there again. I will take that from now on. So this is my lawyer with a cape who then handled that relationship throughout the remainder of the termination of that program. So I would say, how did we take care of ourselves? We really leaned on each other. And when it got hard, we could go share that hard with the other person. And know that they had our back, right? So that self-care piece, you're right, is incredibly important. And I would say because we went through it together, we were able to support one another.
I think the other thing, and it was a bonding or bondage. It was one of the two, maybe both. I think that it is like anything really hard. There is parts of it that no one can help you with. The middle of the night looking at the ceiling, thinking about the people who are losing their jobs, knowing the fear, knowing the clients that aren't going to be served. But I do think doing it in the way of really putting all your energy and time, and I think that was very helpful to us, is we worked a lot on how do we continue programs. How do we put that in a place to be successful? How do we work with funders to say, this may cost a little bit more to get this set up over here, but that way it could be sustainable. Those weren't easy. but I think it gave you that feeling of you were trying to make the difference. I think it's a terrible time, and I look across this room and so many organizations, we're all facing these questions right now. I think the biggest part is this series, being able to come to a room. We weren't having big meetings when we were doing this. That would have been nice. We would have been very happy to see all y'all's faces. I think this is, as bad as this is, there's an opportunity. You're not alone facing this challenge. Organizations that have been financially very strong and had consistent support are not sure. Even if those, the strongest, are unsure right now what this means. That's an opportunity for us as leadership in the nonprofit world to grow together, to talk together. We're not in competition. We are actually in collaboration. And that's truer now than ever.
I'm about to stand up for this one. The Duke Mansion recently had a conversation about navigating the new now. Catherine, you were at that table, that funders table, and you guys were asked to give nonprofits that were in the room some advice. Sam Smith got up, and he said that organizations are going to have to make hard decisions. Let's talk about the data from those hard decisions. There's 5,600 of our babies on the street tonight. 3,200 people on the street that we can count. I went past crisis assistance this morning. A lot of black and brown people standing in line trying to get resources. I'm afraid about what's going to happen at the back end of these decisions that these organizations are going to have to make. The back end of those folks that you had to let go. The struggle that they had to go through. Talk a little bit about the back end of having to make those hard decisions like Peter talked about, because these are people that we're talking about. These are families that we're talking about. These are women with children that we're talking about. These are veterans that we're talking about. Talk a little bit about the hard, because Tracy said, hey, no question is off limits. So I'm asking you, because this is what I do. I'm an advocate in Charlotte. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I try to bring those folks who are now trying to find a place to stay cool. They're being run away from the transit center now. There's no place for us to go. Talk about that back end effect of these organizations that's going to have to make these decisions, like Caring. Even Manuel over here, he's doing great work. What's going to be the back end of the stuff that he's helped so many businesses to be profitable. He's helped me to be profitable. What's the back end of some of the things decisions that some folks are going to have to make?
So I want to say a couple, thank you, James, because you always bring your heart into this work. I want to say one thing before I answer your question. And one, I want to just stipulate all of us are doing good work, every single one of us. And when we have to go through an exercise of downsizing and focusing in, it's not that anything else that we were doing was bad work. We just could not financially sustain it, right? And we owe it to future people to sustain what we can. So I don't want anyone to think that, if you have to go through that exercise, it's not that you're doing bad work. And James, when I think of the back end, right, we started this series by saying philanthropy cannot fill the gaping hole that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act created, and that I fear appropriations next will do even more. We can't backfill it, right? And so what do? And I think what we do is we storytell. We use our platforms to advocate and to help humanize in real terms what is the impact of the decisions that we are making now. What does it mean for the mother who is no longer going to be able to get care for herself or her unborn child at Caring because of changes that have been made to how we're going to fund things? What is the impact when that child then is born and has developmental delays that go undetected because the next agency is not going to be able to do that robust screening? And then what does that mean for CMS when that child starts school? And then what does that mean for the rest of us when that child does not graduate ready to earn or learn or enlist? We have to be able to storytell the cascading effects of the decisions we are making today so that we can bring the voices of those who are impacted into the right rooms and help everyone understand that the decisions we are making will hurt all of us, every single one of us. So I don't have a great answer, James, other than we just have to storytell like we've never done before.
I think that's true.
Hey everyone, I am Braylon, the Executive Director of PPL. My question is, I heard you talk about even some of the biggest organizations may be, experiencing the same thing. And I think about us more of a grassroots where you're already putting your foot forward and getting your nonprofit's name out there and all of that. So what would it look like in the conversations with funders, future funders, when you've already had to probably downsize or cut certain programs? So what does that look like when you're trying to get people on your team, get people on your side, and you also went through this, hey, we're serving less of the population now, and we already was not making a big footprint already, or our funding got cut, and so now instead of at 100% of our funding, we're now at 70% right now. What does those conversations look like when you're trying to gain partners, but you're also going through a phase where we're not where we were? Maybe that has to scale back a little bit. What does that conversation look like with people, those future stakeholders that you want on your side, but you have to have that honest story with them of hey, this is where we were, this was what the trend was, but now we're here.
Well, I think you're so smart and so attuned to understanding that conversation has to take place. And I think to the point James is making, it's going to get worse. No funder doesn't know that the challenge isn't getting greater. That's why we're sitting here. I mean, it really is. So my advice would be, or at least from our experiences as well, I think the more you're honest, the more you're clear of saying, this change has resulted in we've had to reduce 2 staff. Here's how we are trying to bridge what we can of that, but it will impact our numbers. Our goal is to see, we're committed to maintaining this work because this infrastructure is critical, and we are looking at other ways. One, we'd like you to consider helping us bridge that gap. We're also looking at other ways to do that, to grow, because these programs were critical. This is the impact we were having. We are maintaining that infrastructure so we can grow it back. And this is the efforts we're taking to do it. And, I've never gotten to be on the funder side. In my next lifetime, I'm going to be on that side, or that side. Is that what it is? But it is, I think that honesty of this is where we sit, and I think everyone wants to know people have a plan. And what this whole part of this is, you have a plan. You talk about what we're doing, how you're doing it. People don't want to give money to someone who doesn't know how many days cash they have. I would be worried about that, of not saying, you're not doing the evaluation to know, then why would I give you money to put a Band-Aid on something that can't survive? So I think you've already got a lot of your answer, and I think you're right. And this is a time, because funding is going to look different. Relationships are going to look different. Different communities hopefully are going to come in. The $1,000 to $2,000 donor may be a lot more interested in a grassroots organization where instead of a big corporate partnership with a long-term, very large nonprofit.
And I think that the thing I would add is that individuals, corporations, grants, what have you, they want a couple things I've found in 30 years of doing this work. One, they want a strong leader. They want to know someone's thinking about the difficult choices that need to be made and that they're prepared to make those difficult choices. Two, they want to know that you're financially sustainable. So sometimes saying, we need to cut this or we need to do less in order to, right, what you said, in order to be here for the thousands and thousands of people that the organization has now served because of those difficult choices. So they want strong leadership, and they want strong financials, and they want impact. And so if you can have half impact on twice as many people, is that better than a full impact on half as many? And I think it's about the way that you tell that story, and exactly what you said, right? Here's the story of Susie. And Susie was positively impacted by our organization. And right now there's 120 Susies that we're impacting. If you choose to support this, we can take that 120 to 130, right? Or to 140, or to 131, right? Whatever the number is, you're going to have that impact because you're going to be financially sound and you're prepared to make the difficult choices.
Anyone in the back at all today? Okay.
I'd like to describe something and get sort of your feedback in general, because I feel like we also need a new community narrative around I don't know, what I think of as our current reality, which is collectively as a society, we have focused on exercising our individual rights. This is for a long time. And we see that in funding, like with GoFundMe's and people that want to respond to something that they can have a direct impact on. At the same time, we've seen distrust in government and other institutions, and this is not just about DOJ. I mean, if you look at the Leandro case and 30 years of systematically dismantling just the public education system as a function of government as just an example. Like, these have been forces in our society for a long time, sort of leading us to the place of like, I want to be able to exercise my individual rights, not in the collective, but as an individual. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I do think that that is kind of a reality of where we are. So how do we then just embrace it, whether we agree with it or not, but embrace it and sort of reframe it as, okay, here's where we are. We've cut government, we're cutting nonprofit, we've cut this, we're dismantling certain institutions. So now, and as I mentioned earlier, in addition to the Trump tax cuts, this North Carolina corporate tax rate is also being cut. So there's more money in the for-profit sector. How do we then come together to say, so now certain people are theoretically going to make more money or get more dividends. Let's then find a new way to, because getting a $5 donation here or there, even a $5,000 donation, there's not the scalability to that. But what's the new narrative for how we come together to shore up or to fund or to invest in things that whatever the new we are, collectively believe in? Because the old way is sort of, in my view, gone away or been going away, and just a new narrative around collectivism for the greater good, and not just in the individualism, because there's just the lack of scalability is just not there. And this is just my brain, and maybe I'm off, but I just wanted to sort of toss that out there and see, is there an opportunity for a group like this to come together with a new narrative for how we can rise together to invest in the things that are going to matter in a new collective way, with individual donors making a collective impact?
What comes next, and the only thing that I can lean into is the lessons that we've learned from community activism over decades, right? Messaging is incredibly important, and I think what we've seen in the post-COVID world is the importance of feeling a part of community. When I was navigating through COVID and leading an institution, we had to close down 2 major departments of an organization that had 18 different departments. And our discussion was really about what James asked. What happens to the people who are being served by that, to the staff members who are pushing that forward? And one of the leadership team members said, merging out of COVID, said, I never understood the importance of community until I was faced with isolation. The lessons that we took from that was, how do we start to form community for people who are feeling isolated? And so part of the feeling I think that's happening right now is that isolation, right? I have certain beliefs, I have certain values, I'm watching what's happening and it's not aligned with my beliefs or my values. So find your people, right? And then figure out a way to make those people feel that their difference matters. And so one of the things you've seen that's really changed in the political world over the last, let's say, 20 years or so was the power of small individual contributions and what that can do to change a candidate's path forward, right? There's some great examples of that. Maybe nobody that got all the way there, but boy, did they get a whole lot further than they would have gotten because of that collective support. And so whether it's the idea of giving circles and, how do we get together and pool our funds and decide that we're going to support this, or how do we give voice to the stories that aren't being told? People want to feel a part of community. So sometimes that impact starts with the formation of that community rather than these are the things we're going to be able to do. Because you're right, maybe no one $5 contribution or $5,000 contribution will make a difference, but collectively you can. And so that's where Matt's words are so impactful, right? Read the tax law and figure out, like, all right, well, what's my message and who am I then messaging to? All right? I'm not a big fan of spray and pray, right? I was talking to somebody about a direct mail campaign. They were getting a lot of pressure from their board to do a direct mail campaign. I said, okay, well, what's the spend on that and what's the return on that? And you're essentially spraying and praying, right? I'm just going to spray this message out to so many people and hope that something comes in. There's another concept in marketing called the signal to noise ratio, right? If you just constantly communicate, it just becomes noise, rather than sending a directed message to a specific group of people with whom your message will resonate. So how do you start to be really thoughtful about what airtime are you gonna take?
One, there are those that would like to participate in that kind of conversation. Please tell us that as you're filling your survey out, and we can facilitate that discussion. Second point I would like to make is that your institutions that are sitting in places where we can see the landscape, like the Foundation for the Carolinas, we see the connections. I think a part of what is at play here is that these institutions, and the Foundation is not the only one by far, must and should illustrate for people what the connections are. Of all the great work going on in this room, none of it is truly isolated in people's lives. But somebody has to share that story, that narrative out, and make this idea that we are all connected real. So that's a big ask for any one of you to do, not only to make the case for your organization, but this entire community narrative. The context is important, but hold us accountable for making sure that the very idea of a community foundation is built upon the premise that these efforts, these resources are better delivered, have higher impact because they're together. And so we need to do a better job of saying that and sharing examples of why that's true.
Thank you. Bear with me as I try and formulate this request and talk at the same time. It's not fully fleshed out. So there's been a lot of talk about messaging and communication, but for smaller nonprofits who have very small staffs, we know what to do. We don't have the capacity to execute it. So, there are great organizations like Aparo who help us with technology, and we utilize their resources all the time. There is no resources for marketing and communications for smaller nonprofits. So, and I'll spend hours and hours working on an impact report. And, and I have to ignore everything else because I am the only one who has the ability to do that. So, but there are no resources out there. So I just wanted to kind of push that forward of, yes, we agree the messaging needs to, be pushed out there. There are ways to be very, I hate saying this, but laser focused about what type of messaging, who the messaging goes to. But if you don't have a staff to do that, how does that even happen? So I'm waving the white flag.
Tracy, we are outside of your area in Charlotte. We're down in Chester County and Lancaster County, and we have foundations in the area that consider you guys to be the big dogs. So, it is what it is. So whenever you guys formulate ideas, they will often follow with your thoughts, or they'll at least consider your thoughts. Will you be pushing information out to some of the other foundations in the area?
Yes.
Thank
A
you.
short answer. And in future sessions and along the way, as we're continuing with this Agility Together effort, we will show you how we're going to do that. Being mindful of the fact that whether there's a big dog and a lot of small dogs, what have you, that we're a connected region, that what happens in any one county or in one community affects all of them and all of us. And just like it's better for us to move forward together in this room and others, it is better for the region to move forward together, and we can help build capacity for leaders to connect, people to connect, organizations to connect, not just in Mecklenburg County, but on that regional basis. So more to come on that, but the short answer again is yes. And Chester County is an example. Like what happens in Chester County, that dynamic might be reflected on a larger scale here in Mecklenburg County, but the dynamic is probably very, very resonant. And so it matters that we're able to equip our partners and colleagues, and friends and neighbors in rural areas with the tools and resources they need. Part of the reality we're facing is that rural areas are going to be disproportionately affected by the current environment, and those needs will be more pronounced as we're moving forward, and we've got to play a role in moving forward together.
I wanted to piggyback on what she was saying. I think for our organization, we're a performing arts organization, it's marketing, because I do think people are generous and kind, and they're going to donate and they're going to attend the different functions. It's a matter of getting your message out through marketing. And we used to advertise in the newspaper. I'm that old, sorry. But we used to advertise in the newspaper to get singers, to get people to come to our performances, to get donors, and we were successful at that because it's very local, right? Everybody that was reading the papers were here in the community. But now when you're trying to do everything digitally, you're reaching people around the world. And yes, people follow our Facebook pages and our social media pages, but they're not even in the local community. And so I would like to see for programming or for contributions on how we can market in our community to get our message out, because it's great if you have a great story to tell, but if no one's telling that story, if the media or there's no media outlets or marketing avenues to get that story out, then people won't know who to donate to or who to volunteer with or who to support. And so I think a lot of funding and participation within the community comes with marketing and getting the message out. And I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm kind of with you. I know what my story is and I know what to say, but actually getting somebody to help me tell that in this very digital, impersonal community is tough.
I'll say that And when I responded to yes and thank you, please take that as affirmative. You're exactly right, you're exactly right. And in this community and around the region, there are lots and lots of very talented, creative people, writers, communicators, marketers, message people. What will help us make the ask to them for assistance in this sector is not us, foundation, saying we need this, but you saying it. So that when we go to make that ask, it isn't us making the ask, it's us conveying a real need because you said so. So again, and I hate to keep harping on this survey, but this is why that survey is important. And it's important that we stay in dialogue, but the data from that survey will help drive a lot of decisions and a lot of asks. And if we can make the ask on behalf of a community of nonprofit leaders and the people that they serve, it's a much, much stronger ask to make to some very talented people who are part of larger organizations. It's here. The talent and resources are definitely here. So the better we are able to make that connection and make the ask based on what you share with us, the stronger it will be and more likely we can offer exactly that kind of support. Last words from the front?
I think I'll go first and let you finish. I think first, I want to thank everyone for being here. I thank you for doing the work, whatever your focus, whatever you're giving your life to, you are making a difference, and people need us to keep doing this. Our community needs us to keep doing this. It's scary, it feels lonely, but this is truly life-saving, life-changing, and it is the future. And so this uncertainty is not the worst thing we'll ever face, and it's also not something we can't get through. And I just thank you for this opportunity to talk about it and to say, you know, we make a huge difference. The people in our community need us to keep doing it.
And I just echo the thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for answering the survey so we can figure out what to do next that would be helpful to you. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Jay.
We all want to grow. We all want to be agile. We're here for ourselves. We're here for each other. We're here for our communities. We're here because obstacles require a response. And your response was, we want to be talked with instead of talked to. Your response was, maybe we need to recalibrate our relationships. Some of your obstacles were staff turnover, competition for funding. Your response was flexibility, determination, persistence, strength. One of your questions was, what does collaboration really mean? Your response was, we're here right now. We gotta make this work. Your response was, somehow, some way. The question was, what does collaboration really mean? The question reminds me of the great redwood trees, whose roots spread so wide, they actually intertwine with each other. They interlock, which allows them to share resources and to stand firm against storms that approach. I actually know a lot of you. I'm actually friends with many of you, and I consider myself a friend of many nonprofits in Charlotte. I also sit on the boards of 3 nonprofits here. So when I say that I am rooting, pun intended, for each of you, would you believe me? That was too much. That was too far. Too many puns. It's too early. Too many dad puns abounding. The themes for this series was reality, resilience, response. The reality is the cultural landscape of Charlotte would be nothing without its nonprofits to do the work that for-profits won't do and that well-meaning individuals cannot do alone. The resilience is we are used to a world of construction. Even if it's not what we thought we'd be building, we are constantly building something. The response is, we know how important the work is. We will find a way. Response, you have a story that comes from this land. Response, it's a story about every person you've ever helped. Response, it's a story about every person in this room. Response, it's a story that travels time like seed on the wind. Secret. It doesn't matter where the seed lands. It spreads its roots to find the family it needs. I don't have an ending for this poem. I'm just here to see how this grows, how you grow. Thank y'all for being here. Good morning. Have a great morning. Have a great rest of the day. And please, please, from my heart, continue to do the work you are doing. Charlotte is Charlotte because of the work you are doing. Thank you all.